There are things out there, creatures, monsters, ghouls and spirits, beings that fall outside the realm of visible truth, beyond the confines of our basic reality. They lurk in the dark, haunt the recesses of our minds, and stir our curiosity in the unusual and weird. They are taboo topics, stories that we tell around the campfire and folklore passed down from our ancestors. We've been taught that these things don't exist, that they are merely myth and legend. Or are they? Welcome to the Occult Archives. I'm your host and spooky librarian, E.M. Moon, but feel free to refer to me as E. Here lies a space beyond all spaces, a library full of arcane information enough to drive any normal person mad. If you can think of it, if you can question it, the archives probably have what you seek. Another disclaimer for tonight's episode, like last episode. This one is full of customs and characters with words and names that I am not all too familiar with, but I will try my best to pronounce things properly. Feel free to let me know when I'm royally butchering something so that I can correct myself in the future. Thanks, guys. For most of us, the Christmas season is a time of joy, giving, family, and the birth of Jesus Christ. There's millions of twinkling lights, gaudy holiday baubles, ornament-loaded fir trees, and lots of Christmas goodies to snack on. It's full of stories and folklore that are nothing but myth and legend to some who observe the holiday in a more Christian fashion, though their iconography is mostly pagan. But what about the origins of Christmas? Before the times of monotheistic religions and Christian Christmas tales, before we put the Christ in Christmas, most referred to this holiday season as the Winter Solstice or Yule. For those that celebrated at the time, it wasn't about shiny wrapping paper, Black Friday sales, or how much you spent on gifts. It was about surviving the hardest time of the year, the part of the cycle where we emphasize survival over anything as we waited for the sun to return. Originally Yule, Yuletide or Yuletime, or Yule with a J and no E, was a wintertime festival historically celebrated by the Germanic peoples. Scholars have connected the original Yuletide celebrations to the Wild Hunt, the god Odin, and the pagan Anglo-Saxon Modronit, or Mother's Night. Over time, the celebration departed from its pagan roots when it underwent a Christianized reformulation, which turned it into Christmastide. Yet I wonder how many know that their present-day Christmas customs and traditions, like the Yule log, Yule buck or Yule goat, Yule boar, Yule singing, their tree, even their Jesus birth story, all stems from pagan Yule traditions. But there are still people and cultures that use the term Yule to describe Christmas and other festivals occurring during the winter season. Many pagans in various traditions also celebrate Yule, sometimes with or without Christian aspects, even to this day. It is especially prevalent in Wicca, heathenry, and most forms of neo-paganism. Traditionally, Yule was an indigenous midwinter festival that was celebrated by the Germanic peoples of old. Some of the earliest references to it are in the form of month names, where the Yuletide period lasted somewhere around 2 months, about mid-November to early January. The etymology of the word is attested in numerous areas, and the Norse had a similar name for the month that the holiday was prominent in, just like the Anglo-Saxons. But there is also attestation to an actual event by the Old Norse with the name Yule. Even in the Prose Edda, one of the names given to the gods was Yule beings, and one of the numerous names of Odin was Yulnir, which referred to the event. The saga of Hakon the Good credits King Hakon I of Norway, who ruled from 934 to 961 with the Christianization of Norway, as well as rescheduling Yule to coincide with Christian celebrations held at the time. The saga says that when Hakon arrived in Norway, he was a confirmed Christian. But since the land was still altogether heathen and the people retained their pagan practices, Hakon hid his Christianity to receive the help of the great chieftains. In time, Hakon had a law passed establishing that Yule celebrations were to take place at the same time as the Christians celebrated Christmas. And at that time, everyone was to have ale for the celebration with a measure of grain, or else pay fines, and they had to keep the holiday while the ale lasted. Yule had previously been celebrated for 3 nights from midwinter night, according to the saga. Hakon planned that when he had solidly established himself and held power over the whole country, he would then have the gospel preached. According to the saga, the result was that his popularity caused many to allow themselves to be baptized, and some people stopped making sacrifices. Håkon spent most of his time in Trondheim. When he believed that he wielded enough power, he requested a bishop and other priests from England, and they came to Norway. On their arrival, Håkon made it known that he would have the gospel preached in the whole country. The saga continues, describing the different reactions of various regional things. A description of pagan Yule practice is also provided. It was ancient custom that when sacrifice was to be made, all farmers were to come to the heathen temple and bring along with them the food they needed while the feast lasted. At this feast, all were to take part of the drinking of ale. Also, all kinds of livestock were killed All kinds of livestock were killed with it in connection with it, horses also, and all the blood from them was called hlaut, sacrificial blood, and hlautboli, the vessel holding the blood, and haltanar, the sacrificial twigs. These were fashioned like sprinklers, and with them were to be smeared all over with blood the pedestals of the idols and also the walls of the temple within and without, and likewise the men present were to be sprinkled with blood. But the meat of the animals was to be boiled and served as food at the banquet. Fires were to be lighted in the middle of the temple floor, and kettles hung over the fires. The sacrificial beaker was to be borne around the fire, and he who made the feast and was chieftain was to bless the beaker as well as all the sacrificial meat. The narrative continues that toasts were to be drunk. The first toast was to be drunk to Odin, for victory and power to the king. The second to the gods Njordr and Freyr, for good harvests and for peace. And third, a beaker was to be drunk to the king himself. In addition, toasts were drunk to the memory of departed kinsfolk. They were called minni. Obviously, we're not here tonight to talk about the Christianized traditions and practices of the season. I'm going to dig deep and show you its roots, show you that Yule was originally a time for shadow work, inner reflection, hope, and thankfulness. Christmas, as we know it, painted a false, shiny gloss over the season, when it was really one of ghosts and darkness and overcoming those things. If you don't know about the wild hunt, the words might conjure images of snow-laden hunting outings for big game, but for some the thought is much more terrifying. It's a motif that occurs in many Northern European cultures' folktales and involves a soul-raving chase through the sky led by some sort of mythological feature who is escorted by a spectral or supernatural group of hunters passing in wild pursuit. The leader of this hunt, at least in Germanic legends, is the Allfather himself, Odin. But in various other traditions, the leader of the hunt was claimed to be legendary figures like Theodoric the Great or the Danish king Valdemar Atterdag, the Welsh fae psychopomp Gwyn ap Nudd, and even biblical characters such as Herod, Cain, Gabriel, or even the devil himself. The hunters themselves are generally souls of the dead, the fae, ghostly dogs, or even the Valkyries or elves. It really varies depending on the region. And this violent and chaotic procession wasn't a good omen, but quite the opposite for those who may witness the event. Some say that seeing the hunt as it rides wildly through the sky is a herald of horrific catastrophes, such as war or plague, or at best, the death of whoever witnessed it. There are some tales that say those who observe the hunt are more vulnerable to abduction by the hunters, as they abscond with you back to the other or underworld. But even if you didn't catch the hunt as it raced overhead, some say that people's spirits, even those who sleep soundly in bed, were pulled away in the night to join the cavalcade. A little late-night astral merriment without remembering how you got to the party. What's funny is, if you think about this ghastly procession, it's really a more macabre version of the tales of Santa Claus and his reindeer flying through the sky to bring presents to good little children. Except here we have Odin, a mighty and fierce god, and his raiders as they pillage the sky and foretell death and destruction. What a ride that would be. But the story has probably evolved and changed over the years from its initial origins, and the hunt most likely involved the gods and was seen as a way to bless the people in the lands in the darkest part of the year. Some in modern paganism have even replaced Odin and the like with Hecate in a rite as a means of confronting the dark of nature as a process of initiation. Indeed, the dark part of the year is meant for reflection and reverence of the darkest parts of nature, no matter what aspect. But the season was also the time to invite the light back, to remember that there are warmer days ahead and we will come out of the darkness. It doesn't last forever. The Yule log was part of certain Yuletide traditions, namely in the United Kingdom and subsequently the Americas, and involved a specially selected log that was then burnt in the hearth during Christmas time. The origins of this tradition, like most other Yuletide traditions, is thought to be derived from Germanic paganism. American folklorist Linda Watts sums up the custom. The familiar custom of burning the Yule log dates back to earlier solstice celebrations and the tradition of bonfires. The Christmas practice calls for burning a portion of the log each evening until Twelfth Night, which was January 6th. The log is subsequently placed beneath the bed for luck, and particularly for protection from the household threats of lighting and, with some irony, fire. Many have beliefs based on the Yule log as it burns, and by counting the sparks and such, they seek to discern their fortunes for the new year and beyond. Like I mentioned before, the concept of Yule and all its symbolism and traditions most likely originated before Christianization as a custom observed by the Germanic pagans. As early as 1725, an English-born historian by the name of Henry Bourne sought a definitive origin of the Yule log in Anglo-Saxon paganism. Our forefathers, when the common devices of eve were over and night was come on, were wont to light up candles of an uncommon size, which were called Christmas candles, and to lay a log of wood upon the fire, which they termed the Yule clog or Christmas block. There was to illuminate the house and turn the night into day, which custom, in some measure, is still kept up in the northern parts. It hath, in all probability, been derived from the Saxons. For Bede tells us that this very night was observed in this land before by the heathen Saxons. They began, says he, their year on the 8th of the calendars of January, which is now our Christmas party, and the very night before, which is now holy to us, was by them called Madronach, or the Night of the Mothers. The Yule clog, therefore, hath probably been part of those ceremonies, which were performed that night's ceremonies. It seems to have been used as an emblem of the return of the sun and the lengthening of the days, for as both December and January were called Gwili, or Yule, upon account of the sun's returning and the increase of the days, so I am apt to believe the log had the name of the Yule log from its being burnt as an emblem of the returning sun and the increase of its light and heat. This was probably the reason of the custom among the heathen Saxons, but I cannot think the observation of it was continued for the same reason after Christianity was embraced. Sorry, I totally tripped over my words with that one, but, dialogue from the 1700s. Anyway, in a more modern tone, G.R. Willey said in 1883, communal bonbons with feasting and jollification have a pagan root. Ritual bonfires at the beginning of November once signaled the start of another year and the onset of winter. Their subsequent incorporation into the Christian calendar to become part and parcel of the festival of Christmas, and later their association with the New Year of January 1st, is an intriguing story. Many, if not all, of the various customs and traditions at one time extensively witnessed at Christmas and the Old New Year stem from this common source, e.g. Twelfth Night bonfires, including Old Meg from Worcestershire, and burning the bush from Herefordshire, first footing, etc. Any traces of primitive rituals, such as scattering of burnt ashes or embers as an omen of fertilization or purifications, have long since disappeared. Obviously, these accounts, no matter how long ago they were recorded, were not jotted down by pagans in any sense of the word, especially since these customs are still alive and well in the neo-pagan community, albeit slightly different because of the influence of Wicca, and in Reconstructionist groups. It's been adopted by certain Christians over the years, like most traditions of the season, its roots almost completely obscured or forgotten. But the invention of the internet is a beautiful thing, at times, and has given us common folk access to things that we may have otherwise never known about, since they don't always teach us these things in public school. But there is a theme we are seeing with Yule as we delve into its customs, and that is that the holiday is inherently pagan in its origin, and from a time before Christianity dominated everything. The Yule goat is another example of old pagan customs still alive and well in their country of origin at the very least. It is a prominent Yule symbol in Scandinavian and Northern European traditions. As with everything else we've talked about, it is most likely Germanic pagan in origin, and has existed in many variants throughout Scandinavian history. The Yule goat harkens back to ancient pagan festivals, with one popular theory about the celebration of the goat being its connection to worship of the Norse god Thor, who rode across the sky in a chariot drawn by two goats, Tangersnir and Tangenjoster. Sorry about that. But it most likely goes back to common Indo-European beliefs. In this custom, the last sheaf of grain, modernly straw, that was bundled in the harvest was credited with magical properties as the spirit of the harvest and saved for the Yule celebrations. It was called the Yule goat or Yulebaken. In Sweden, folks regarded the Yule goat as some sort of unseen spirit or entity that would appear sometime before Christmas to make sure that the Yule preparations were done correctly. At the time, objects made of straw or roughly hewn wood could also be referred to as the Yule goat. In older Scandinavian society, a popular Christmas-time prank was to place the goat in a neighbor's house without them noticing. If the prank was successful, the pranked family then had to get rid of it the same way. I actually really love the idea of a good Yule trolling on the neighbors. The function of the Yule goat itself has differed throughout the years. One of the original customs being similar to wassailing, where young men dressed in costumes would walk between houses singing songs, putting on little plays, and performing pranks. This group of Yuletide characters usually involved the Yule goat, who was quite the capricious character and sometimes rather frightening as it demanded gifts. During the 19th century, it seemed that the goat's role shifted towards becoming a giver of Christmas gifts, like good old Santa, with one of the men in the family dressing up as the Yule goat. Eventually, the goat was replaced with the Juletomte or Julenissi, although it is still called the Joulupukki, the Yule goat in Finland, but the tradition of the man-sized goat disappears. Honestly, though, we should bring back that tradition because I really enjoy the idea of watching a fully grown man prance around dressed as a hairy goat while he passes out gifts to the wee ones. Much funnier to think about than Krampus. Wait, is there much of a difference between the two characters? Krampus is a horned figure in Alpine folklore akin to the Yule goat in some ways, but more human in appearance. Think of vintage depictions of the devil. He was said to appear during the Christmas season to scare misbehaving children, assisting St. Nicholas, who rewards the well-behaved kids on the eve of December 5th with modest gifts like oranges, dried fruit, walnuts, and chocolates. Meanwhile, the bad ones were gifted with birch rod only. The history of Krampus has been theorized to date back to pre-Christian Alpine traditions. In an article published in 1958, Maurice Bryce wrote, "There seems to be little doubt as to his true identity, for, in no other form is the full regalia of the horned god of the witches so well preserved. The birch, apart from its phallic significance, may have connections with the initiation rites of certain witch covens, rites which entailed binding and scourging as a form of mock death. The chains could have been introduced in a Christian attempt to bind the devil, but again they could be a remnant of pagan initiation rites." Although Krampus appears in many variations, most seem to share the same common characteristics: a hairy body with brown or black fur, cloven hooves, and the horns of a goat with a long, pointy tongue that lolls from his mouth, and sharp, pointy fangs as the icing on the cake. I see how the Christians could easily twist this character into their devil. This may be where the addition of chains that he carries, thought to symbolize the bindings of the devil by the Christian church. Of course, he thrashes these chains about for dramatic effect, just like ghosts do in old tales, though the chain was accompanied by bells of various sizes in some stories. But if we are looking for more pagan origins in the depiction of Krampus, the ruten, or bundles of birch branches that Krampus carries to swat bad children, may have had significance in pre-Christian pagan initiation rites like proposed by Bryce, although the branches are replaced by a whip in some representations. In others, he is shown with a basket on his back or a cloth sack to cart away evil little children so that he could drown, eat, or transport them to hell at a later time. Even older versions of the story mention naughty children being spirited away in the bag on Krampus's back. Krampusnacht, the evening of December 5th, the day before the celebrations start for the Feast of St. Nicholas, wicked, hairy creatures appear in the streets of parts of Europe, sometimes accompanied by St. Nicholas himself. These Krampus beasts visit homes and businesses that night. Unlike North American versions of Santa Claus, St. Nicholas only brings gifts to the good children, while Krampus is the one responsible for the bad. Nick gives gifts to the good kids, Krampus supplies the coal and the ruten bundles. It is also customary to offer Krampus schnapps, and it was common to exchange Krampuskarten, which were greeting cards featuring the Yule spirit with humorous rhymes and poems printed on the front, while Krampus loomed over bad children in the background. Of course, there are regional variations to the myth. In Styria, the ruten bundles are presented by Krampus to families. The bundle of twigs are then painted gold and displayed in the household year-round as a reminder to any child who may have forgotten about Krampus. In other smaller villages, Krampus has other beastly companions, such as the antlered wild man and no St. Nicholas to be seen. In areas of Croatia, Krampus is described as a devil wearing a cloth sack and laden with chains. As part of this tradition, when the children receive gifts from St. Nicholas, they are also given a golden branch to represent all the good things they had done throughout the year. However, if the child misbehaved, Krampus would take the gifts for himself and leave only a silver branch to represent the children's bad acts. And then you have parts of Austria, where he is seen as more of a humorous character instead of a one to be feared, because the fear aspect was left up to another prominent figure in Alpine paganism. Püchte, or Pücht, was once known as a goddess in the upper German and Austrian regions of the Alps. Her name may mean the bright one, and is probably related to the name Buchtentag, which meant the Feast of the Epiphany, but could possibly be in relation to the old High German verb purgen, which meant hidden or covered. That seems more likely to me. She was often identified as stemming from the Germanic goddess Holda and other female figures of Germanic folklore like Freya or Frigg. Some say she is Holda's southern cousin or equivalent, as they both share the role of guardian of the beasts and appear during the 12 days of Christmas where they oversee spinning. Püchte is said to have two forms, appearing as either a beautiful maiden and white as snow like her name, or conversely as an old haggard hag. In older descriptions, she is said to have one large foot, sometimes called a goose foot or swan foot. The strange foot is thought to symbolize her being a higher being who could possibly shapeshift into animal form. This makes sense considering her role as guardian of the beasts. It could also symbolize the splayed foot of a woman that works the treadle in spinning fibers. Originally, Püchte was the upholder of cultural taboos, such as the prohibition against spitting on holidays. In the folklore of Bavaria and Austria, she was said to roam the countryside at midwinter, entering homes during the 12 days between Christmas and Epiphany, especially on Twelfth Night. Püchte would know whether the children and younger servants of the household had behaved well and worked hard throughout the year. If they had, she might leave them a small silver coin the next day in a shoe or pail. But if they had not, she would slit their bellies open, remove their entrails, and stuff the hole full of straw and pebbles. She was particularly concerned with whether or not the girls had spun the whole of their allotted portion of flax or wool during the year. And children weren't the only ones that could end up with split bellies stuffed full of straw if she found out that you had eaten something on the night of her feast day, other than the traditional meal of fish and gruel. Modernly, Püchte is portrayed as a rewarder of the generous and the punisher of the bad, particularly lying children. Today, in Salzburg, Austria, she is said to wander through Hohensalzburg Castle in the dead of night, and in other regions, like Pongau, there are large processions full of what they call beautiful and ugly Püchten, women dressed as maidens and hags. The women are disguised with the beautiful masks to encourage financial windfalls, while the ugly masks are worn to drive away evil spirits. But Püchte and Krampus aren't the only two horrifying depictions of Yuletide spirits and monsters that attempt to keep children in line. Gryla was originally mentioned as being a giantess in the 13th century compilation of Norse mythology called the Prose Edda. There was no specific connection between her and Christmas that was mentioned until the 17th century, but she was said to be enormous in appearance and completely grotesque to look upon. Some of the oldest poems involving the Christmas witch describes her as being a parasitic beggar who wandered around asking parents to give her their disobedient children. But supposedly she can be thwarted by either giving her food, which is not as tasty as bad children, or by chasing her away. Though you try chasing away a giantess and see what happens. Originally, Gryla resided in a small cottage, but in later stories she had been driven out of town and forced to live in a faraway cave. Gryla supposedly had the ability to detect, through whispers, who had been naughty children year-round in more current stories. During Christmas time, she comes down from the mountain, enters unsuspecting towns, looking for her latest meal. She leaves only to hunt for children, and then returns to her home in the caves with the children stuffed in her giant sack. Children are her favorite snack, after all. I myself prefer those Swedish butter cookies or some gingerbread around the holidays, but hey, I'm no Icelandic giantess. According to the folktales, Gryla has been married 3 times, though I can't really say what happened to the first 2 husbands. She most likely killed them, if we're being honest. But her third, Lepeludi, is said to live with her in the caves. He is also said to be rather lazy, staying at home in the cave while Gryla ran rampant across the land. But Gryla wasn't alone in these escapades. The giantess had a brood of 13 filthy troll sons: Sheepcoat Claude, Gullygawk, Stubby, Spoonlicker, Pot Scraper, Bowl Licker, Door Slammer, Skeer Gobbler, Sausage Swiper, Window Peeper, Door Sniffer, Meat Hook, and Candle Beggar. Lovely, lovely names for those boys. It was said that throughout the majority of the year, Gryla and her Yule lads lived hidden inside the daunting lava fortress of Dimmuborgir in Iceland. From the 12th of December to the 24th was the time of year when the lads departed from their cave and engaged in 13 days of mischief all across the land. Their antics varied as far as the pranks they pulled and the chaos they caused, but it was nothing short of grotesque and horrifying. They caused this mischief until the end of the Yule season. Nowadays, the troll boys have been glossed over and painted in a more jovial fashion. Instead of being extremely disfigured monsters, they are portrayed in traditional red and white clothes with fluffy beards and big smiles, more akin to the Tomte or Nissi. Rather than pull pranks, they leave presents in children's shoes that they leave on the windowsills, sort of like stockings hung by the fire. Instead of coal, naughty children find a potato in their shoe once morning comes, which not so bad being naughty if you particularly like potatoes. Potatoes. Besides her lazy husband's uninvolvement, this seemed to be the family business, as even the cat joined in on the fun. But their cat wasn't just any ordinary feline. It went by the name Yule Cat, or Jolekaturen, and was an enormous black beast who, not surprisingly, also had an appetite for fresh human flesh. He, however, only seems to appear on Christmas Eve, while all the little children are sound asleep dreaming of all the gifts they will receive in the morning. But if none of those gifts contain new clothes for the children to wear, the cat will be feasting on them for Christmas dinner. This cat is most likely not a cat at all, but a being that was trollish in nature, but it doesn't really matter what the cat actually was. It was still horrifically frightening nonetheless. We can see from these origin stories a theme, a terrifying one, but a theme nonetheless. Nowadays we tell our children to behave lest Santa puts them on the naughty list and they receive coal instead of gifts on Christmas morning. But our ancestors had a wholly different idea when it came down to getting their children to behave and be respectful, lest they be pranked, beaten, disemboweled, or eaten in a stew. I'm sure it was effective at the time, but I can't imagine the trauma inflicted on them if they truly believed such stories. To reiterate, Yuletime is a dark time. It harkens back to a period where the winter was seen as a possible omen of death if the harvest had been slim or hunting sparse. They didn't have the amenities we have now, just their fortitude, strength, and the belief in their gods. These were rough times, and we see that reflected in these stories and myths. They were warnings to the people that the shadow part of the year was not to be tested, and it was best to do your work and take care of your people throughout the year, so that you were safe and set once winter came. Be good to one another. Be grateful. Stay safe inside, lest the wild hunt whisks you away to hell, or Krampus and Gryla kidnap you and punish you for not behaving for your parents. It was extreme, but it was also a product of its time. There are many more Christmas folktales and figures, but these are just a few and the ones that seemingly started it all. These tales of terror carried on in the tradition of telling ghost stories around Christmas time. The dead still walked among us at this time, our ancestors honored and remembered, so it only makes sense that these sorts of stories would crop up. One of the most memorable and well-known is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, where the main antagonist is visited by 3 ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future that scares him into being a better person. There's that theme again. I was originally going to read Christmas ghost stories. Still thinking about Gryla. I was originally going to read Christmas ghost stories for tonight's episode, but couldn't find ones that were a quick read, so that I could, mush mouth my way through, or that you hadn't already heard. I will, however, leave a link in the show notes that has a good list if you want to read the stories yourself when you have time. Instead, I'm going to share a spooky Christmas story of my own that I originally read in my Halloween bonus episode, but I thought I would share with everyone else since it fits the theme of tonight's episode. The story is called The Christmas Bones. As long as I can remember, my mother put bones under the Christmas tree. No other kids I knew put bones under their Christmas tree, just presents. But my mother put bones under the Christmas tree every year. When I'd ask why, she would tell me that it was an old folk tradition, something my granny had taught her, and that she'd teach me about it when I was older. The underside of the tree would stay bare until the 22nd of December. After I was snug in bed, she would put them out like some horror movie Santa, and I would wake up the next morning to the heap of bones under the tree. Each year, there would be more. A new skull, an extra tibia, another femur. I'd ask her where they came from, and she would always tell me that she would explain everything when I was older. That told me nothing. It was getting to the point where there were more bones than presents, but my mother made sure I had always had plenty of gifts on Christmas morning. And it was usually just the two of us for Christmas. Some years it was me, Mom, and her current boyfriend, but the relationship never lasted through Christmas, and the man was usually gone out of the picture by the morning of. Mom always said she had the worst luck with men, even my father. He ran off when I was 3, and we never saw him again. It was fine, though, because I was perfectly happy with it just being me and my mother without anyone else to possibly destroy our Christmas. But I grew up and I grew lonely. Lonely for companionship. Lonely for companionship that wasn't my mother. I wanted romance. I had no idea what I was doing when it came to dating, but I met someone in town. We hit it off, got coffee a few times, saw a movie or two, and I thought it would blossom from there. Eventually, we did become serious, but my mother didn't like him. I figured it had something to do with her personal feelings on relationships, considering her history, but after a few months, she seemed to warm up to the idea of him in my life. I was ecstatic because I was sure I was in love. But what did I really know about anything? "More bones, Mom?" I asked as she walked into the kitchen on the morning of the 22nd. "Sadly, no." She sounded off as she spoke with her back to me, her hands moving methodically as she prepared her coffee like she did every morning. "Too bad." I was being sarcastic, but I felt rather awful because I knew what the bones meant to her. Maybe I can go out in the woods and find you some. You know I have a knack for that." I offered my services as a finder of weird and obscure things, but my mother waved her hand at me. "No need. I will find something to go under the tree." She waved her hand at me before she turned around with coffee cup to her lips. "You're sure?" I softened my tone a bit more. "Yes, baby. It's not time for you to carry on this tradition yet." Her words sounded strange as she smiled wryly at me and left the kitchen. This mood was very unlike her, especially this time of year. There was always a severity to her demeanor when the weather started to get really cold, but she still kept a rather jovial air. But not now. Not today. Something was wrong, but I couldn't place it, and she clearly wasn't talking. I had to get to class or I would have hounded her about what was eating at her, but I figured I would just let her sit with herself for a few hours until I got home. Maybe then I would be able to coax it out of her. It was the last day before classes ended for the semester. They released earlier than usual, and I was able to make it home while the sun was still high and the day still bright and somewhat cheerful, despite the ever-graying thickness of impending snow clouds. The flakes would start to fall soon, and I knew that the whole of the land would be stark white by the time the sun completely set. How appropriate for the solstice. When I arrived home, the front door was slightly ajar, and I immediately felt a sense of dread deep in my stomach. It was quickly replaced by a fluttering as my mother burst through the door before I could even make it up the stairs. Her hands were full of leather cords, a metal symbol hanging from the bottom of each. She didn't say a word to me as she stepped up a ladder and began hanging them from fresh nails embedded in the underside of the porch awning. "Mom, what are you doing?" I paused with my foot on the stairs as I gawked at her. She immediately stopped what she was doing and turned her head to look at me, as if she had no idea I was there before I spoke. "Decorating?" She smiled at me. But something was so very wrong about that smile. For what? Because those don't look like Christmas lights." I pointed at one of the symbols forged in cold iron. It had a large loop at the top where the iron had been carefully shaped and folded over itself, the ends neatly curled inward with a small spiral. "The solstice? We're doing something a little different this year." My mother smiled at me again. This time the lie behind it was a little more convincing. "And what are those symbols?" I asked curiously. I felt like I had seen them somewhere before, probably in a movie, but I couldn't quite figure out where. They're troll crosses. Christians put up crosses for Jesus. We put up troll crosses for the solstice." She nodded with another weird smile and went back to decorating. The crosses are used at Easter, Mom, not Christmas. Baby Jesus was born on Christmas and died around Easter. If they're hanging up crosses around other times of the year, like we are hanging these, they're probably trying to ward away evil like every haunted house movie. I had a feeling, and I definitely didn't like it. My mother had hung the last of the troll crosses and stopped dead on her step of the ladder before she took a very deep breath and sighed. Happy solstice, baby. I made some cookies this morning after you left for class if you want some. They're on the kitchen table. She never looked at me as she climbed down off that ladder and calmly walked back inside. I was left standing there, one foot still on the stairs, alone. She had completely ignored what I said, dismissed me, and went about her business as if we had never had the conversation about the troll crosses. This was the first time I had ever seen them, at least in a way that I could remember, and there was something eerily unsettling about the dozens of iron sigils swaying in the icy breeze that had begun to blow. The snow was coming, and it looked to be heavy, so I convinced myself that my mother knew how bad the storm could be, and put the crosses up to protect us from the impending blizzard. But I knew I was convincing myself of a lie. I had fallen asleep. I couldn't get my mother to talk to me about anything. After she had hung the troll crosses and disappeared inside, I found her in the kitchen making something in a pot on the stove before she transferred it to the iron one that she hung in the fireplace around this time of year. Usually she was making barley stew, but whatever this concoction was, it was not barley stew. When I asked about the recipe, she turned to me and smiled, but never said a word. I had never seen her act so bizarrely, and I was starting to get concerned, but I couldn't get her to communicate with me, and in my frustration, I hid myself in my room with my headphones on and a new book. I had been studying so hard for my finals and spending long afternoons with the animals, preparing them for the bitter cold of winter, trying my best to pull my weight while still getting an education. So inevitably, I fell asleep. But I woke up abruptly for some reason. There was this sound, a sensation, a vibration in the air that was heavy, a low thrum that reverberated through every fiber of my being. It felt large, tall and hulking, intimidating, foreboding, threatening. I was instantly on the defensive as I leapt out of the bed, but quietly made my way to the door. It was partially open, and I knew just the right speed to swing it in so that it made no sound. The weight of the vibration intensified as soon as the door was wide open, and I could hear my mother whispering loudly in the living room. Her words should have made sense, but my brain couldn't wrap itself around the sounds to translate them. All I knew is that they were angry and desperate. Then something replied. It was the vibration. It rippled through the air with such a weight that it felt like I was sinking. Every limb, every bone, every organ felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It spoke words that sounded more like earthquakes rumbling deep within the earth, and I had to clutch my throat so that I didn't make a choking sound, my whole body completely disoriented. Whatever it said caused my mother to cry out in strangled anguish. She was begging it in that tongue that I couldn't understand. I forced myself to crawl to the top of the stairs. I could tell the conversation was getting heated, and I had to see who she was talking to. It was either going to end in one of two ways. The vibrato would leave in a deliberate act of ending the conversation, or he would escalate into violence, and I didn't know if I could even help her. My mother continued to beg and plead, but the vibration had had enough, and it bellowed so loudly that I feared my skull would split in two. The front door blew open with a phantom gust, icy cold air blowing in swirls of downy snow. I had just made it to the top stairs in time to see the backside of something as it exited the house. There was 3 of them that I saw on the edge of the porch as the door slammed shut on its own, and my mother's sobs began to echo through the house. What I saw was impossible. I was still asleep. There was no arguing that. This had to be a dream because the beings that I saw leaving my house angrily were heads taller than the 7-foot Yule tree, and just seeing their backsides as they left caused my whole body to involuntarily shudder in fear. I was in shock. I knew that feeling, but I wanted to wake up. My mother's sob should have woken me up. "Mommy?" I called out meekly from the top of the stairs. I wasn't asleep. "Baby?" The sobbing stopped abruptly, and I could hear her choking them back. "Did I wake you?" You didn't wake me." I finally pulled myself to my feet and clung to the banister for support as I carefully guided myself down the stairs. "No?" She appeared at the bottom before I had fully made it down. Her face was stark white save for the smears on her face, the streaks of dark red that also covered her fingers and hands. Who were they, Mom? I wasn't going to let her avoid me any longer. Who was who, baby? Were you sleepwalking again? She tried. She tried to change the subject and avoid telling me what was going on. No, you're not going to do this to me. I know you're just trying to protect me, but you're not going to avoid telling me the truth. Do you think that you can just smile, bake me cookies, and eventually I'll just stop asking questions? Mom, you know that we don't do that. We've never done that, and especially now. I'm officially an adult, and I think that you should be able to talk to me like one. What the hell is going on? I gestured at the blood on her hands and the snow that had gathered on the floor just inside the threshold. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with bruised eyes, dark with lack of sleep and exhaustion. If she wasn't going to explain, I was going to figure it out anyway, and I began my descent of the stairs once again. This got my mother to finally move as she tried to prevent me from passing her at the bottom, but I asserted my size and tried to politely push past her. But she grabbed me roughly by the arms and tried to push me back up the stairs. I couldn't let that happen, and even in my surprise that she had put her hands on me like that, I was determined to discover what she wanted to keep me in the dark about. I didn't mean to throw her like I did. It wasn't a violent gesture, but my mother, in her tired state, lost her balance and fell against the stairs. She slid to the bottom, calling out for me to stop as I turned into the living room to a grisly sight. The old rug that my mother had woven was soaked in blood. Lying atop it was what looked like a person, or had once been a person, in a hurried state of dismemberment. It was definitely a man based on the face that was staring back at me, glassy blue eyes now foggy in death. He looked like he had been hacked at in a frantic state. Nothing was neatly in pieces, and the flesh was torn as if gnashed at by wolves. At least I didn't recognize him, because I probably would have done much more than turn and vomit right next to the Yule tree. Mom? My voice didn't sound like my own as it escaped my lips. I could feel the vomit still in the corners of my mouth and used the sleeve of my sweater to wipe it away. I didn't care about how gross that was with the image before me. You have to let me explain. My mother came up behind me with a confidence in her voice unlike the way she had been speaking throughout the day. Let you explain? My voice pitched as I backed away from her closer to the tree. There is a chopped up dead man on our living room rug, Mom! What the fuck is going on? I contradicted myself, but the shock had gotten to a point where I needed answers, and I needed them now before I made the decision to run terrified from the house. Terrified of my own mother. I said, I will explain, but I need you to not interrupt me. This is a long story that I have dreaded having to tell you for the majority of your life. My mother paused, motioning for me to follow her to the kitchen. It was as if she just realized that she was covered in someone else's dried blood. As much as I didn't want to follow, my feet had other plans. She went straight to the sink and adjusted the handle for warm water before she began to speak. I don't know what you saw besides the man in the living room, but I'm going to start from the beginning and try to get it all out while I can. When you were 3, you started to get headaches. We didn't realize that was what they were at first, only that you were inconsolable most of the time, and we had to go through months of testing before we determined what the problem was. You had a brain tumor. My mother spoke loud enough for me to hear her over the running water. A brain tumor? I had a brain tumor? How had she never told me this before? I can see you wanting to ask questions, but I need you to wait. We discovered the tumor, and soon after the doctors told us that it was malignant and basically gave you no more than 6 months to live. It was inoperable, and there was nothing they could do. We basically were waiting for you to die. My mother had finished washing her hands, wiped down her face, and had now come to stand by the kitchen table. She made me sit with my back to the living room and took a chair across from me as she went on. Your father and I had already separated when I found out about the tumor. I met up with him to let him know, but his only concern was how much it was going to cost him in hospital bills to keep you alive just a bit longer. I should have killed him right then, but I'm glad I didn't. My mother had a wistful look on her face, but she continued on. Your gran was not happy about this, which was to be expected, but what she suggested to me was ludicrous and out of the question. My mother had taken a cigarette from her purse hung on the back of the chair and lit it. She never smoked in the house. What did Granny think you should do? I couldn't help myself. That I make a pact with the Frost Edens. Do what now? Mom? What are you talking about? As if the dead man in my living room wasn't crazy enough, I needed just a bit more insanity in my life. The Frost Ettins will make pacts, deals with humans for the right price. She suggested that I make an offering to the Ettins and ask them for aid. I didn't think they'd show. I never thought they'd come. But they did. They accepted my measly offering of cooked meat and they came. I pleaded my case and they accepted that too. They said they could spare your life, but it would come at a price. My mother paused again, this time with her eyes fixed on me. She didn't blink. She didn't twitch. She just stared. What was the cost? I had to know, and I knew that I had to pull it out of her. Death was coming for you, and the only way to stop it from taking you was with yearly offerings. The Ettins froze the tumor, keeping it from growing any further, keeping it from affecting your brain. In return, I was to hold a blot every solstice, their time of the year, and sacrifice a life for every year that they added onto yours. My mother's stoic expression broke, and silent tears began to well in her eyes. A human life? I thought I understood that much. A human life. A human life would be sacrificed, the flesh given to the Ettins as offerings, the blood to aid another year of life, and the bones. And the bones ended up under the tree. A shiver crept up my spine as the sudden realization of the bones that had been a norm of my holidays since I could remember belonged to once living, breathing people that my mother had murdered. You killed people? I asked, tears now hot on my cheeks. Of course she killed someone. He was dead in the other room, but I hadn't expected multiple someones. I had to, baby. If I didn't, you died. Your heartless wretch of a father was the first to go, a decision that I didn't need to take time to make. The bones were placed under the tree, one from each sacrifice as a warning and ward to death. Your dues are still being paid and your life extended. There are 15 under the tree right now. My mother started to relax as she lit up another cigarette. But I'm 19 and you couldn't find a new bone for this year. I now understood why she had been so upset this morning. She couldn't find a sacrifice in time. I didn't have time to mull over the revelation that my father never actually ran off. Not exactly. I had no problem finding the offering. My fear was that it wouldn't be accepted. The tears started again as my mother blew out a huge puff of smoke. She was making me want one. And based on what I heard, even though I couldn't understand it, I took a ragged breath. It wasn't accepted. Always so intuitive you are. No, they didn't accept it. That was a wasted sacrifice, but it also wasn't my best work. My mother's words sounded calloused, but I was trying to see this situation from her perspective. I don't understand. Why accept it for this long and then all of a sudden... Why let me die now? What was the point? Why wasn't this sacrifice as good as the others? Panic had set in that I could possibly die at any moment without being able to defend myself. Baby, shh, no, calm down. They didn't rescind the pact, they just won't accept the sacrifice and offering from me. My mother had risen from her chair and come to embrace me, to comfort me in my anxious state. Why? Why do they think you cheated them? Do they want more? I couldn't comprehend what I was feeling. I didn't want to die, but I didn't want any more to die just to keep me alive. The internal confliction was causing my throat to tighten, my hands to shake. Stop. Take a deep breath and listen to me. My mother gently took my face in her hands and commanded me to look at her. Those men, all those boyfriends that I had through the years, I chose them because they were a waste. They were repeat offenders, abusing women, hurting animals, manipulators, gaslighters. They were men who were never going to learn, and I chose them for this reason. The Ice Ettin loved the taste of scum like them, devouring all the trash that pollutes the world. Me and the Ettins did the world a favor, and it saved your life. But I'm only responsible for that life while you are still a child. Laws are different here than they are where the Ettins are from, so they let me be responsible for you just a bit longer. My mother was clearly trying to stay strong, but I could hear the breaks in her voice. What are you trying to tell me, Mom? I had a sudden sense of dread wash over me. I made 15 sacrifices in your favor. I took 15 lives, 16, but 15 lives so that you could have 15 more. But part of the contract states that when you become an adult, the pact is transferred to you. You are responsible for the lives taken to save your own. That is why the Ettins didn't accept my offering, and they were firm on that. My mother's face hardened as she spoke those last words. There was nothing she could do. The minute she made the 15th pact last year, right after I turned 18, the responsibility became mine, but she'd never told me. She had tried to carry my weight without letting me know there was even a burden to be carried, and I knew. I knew that she was holding tremendous guilt for that now, because in trying to keep me from becoming a murderer like her, it may have been the one thing that actually killed me. So I have to kill someone to get another year. I wanted to be straight on this and make sure that I understood completely. Yes, there's no real discrimination, but the dirtier the soul, the better. That doesn't matter, though. I'm going to go through your grand's old books and find a loophole, find some way that you won't ever have to walk this road. My mother broke again and took my hands, assuring me that she would make it right. But I thought about it. I thought about all the sacrificing she had done to keep me alive, to love me, to educate me, to send me to school and protect me to the point that she never really got a chance to be happy outside of us. She deserved to be happy, and me being dead wouldn't make her happy. No, Mom, you're not fixing this. You don't have to protect me anymore. You've done so much for me, sacrificed so much that I can't even imagine. And I want you to be able to relax, to be happy, to not have to worry about me. Sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do, and sometimes they are hard, and sometimes people won't agree with it. But I believe what you did was right. No one will miss those sorts of people. You get to finally live your life. I can live mine. The worlds are a better place. But it's a heavy price. A whole life for just 1 year. I hesitated in my confident speech. But a year for you would do a world of difference for good when they will never do a single good thing for the world in their lifetime. If you choose this route, you are committed to the pact. The moment you decide that you won't make a sacrifice is the moment you forfeit your life to them. And if you're going to do this, you have to choose a sacrifice soon before Yule comes to an end, and you don't have long. My mother bolstered my confidence and her own. This would be a big decision to make. You know you were right about him. I painted a pretty picture for you so that you liked him, but he's not a good man. The things he's done to me. I closed my eyes, trying not to recall the trauma that I held in regards to my boyfriend, the man that I couldn't get away from, the man I thought I loved. And I'm not the first. I can't get away, Mom. I've tried. The fact that I was able to come here was a miracle because he wanted me to stay at the apartment with him for Christmas, but I told him that it was tradition and I had to be here. I had to sneak out while he was sleeping, and I'm surprised he hasn't come looking for me. Maybe it's the snow. I rambled on, not sure where I was going with this. What are you trying to say, baby? Are you trying to tell me that you want your first sacrifice to be him? My mother narrowed her eyes at me. I could see the pure hatred and rage behind them for the man I thought I loved. We don't have much time, do we? I spoke with no emotion. The decision was made. Good choice. The Ettons will be pleased. My mother kissed my forehead. Now, get back to bed while I clean this mess up in the living room. We have a lot of work to do in just a few short days. Oh, by the way, Merry Christmas. My mother handed me a cookie from the plate on the table before grabbing the box of garbage bags and the mop. Merry Christmas, Mom, I smiled, shaking my head as I took a bite of the cookie. She had made enough sacrifices for me, and it was due time that I returned the favor for her. That's all for tonight's episode. I hope you enjoyed my little story, and I hope you enjoy all the other folklore we got to talk about. This part is unscripted, as you can tell, because there's lots of ums and ahs from me, but I didn't have time to write anything down, so I'm just kind of chit-chatting here at the end with you guys. It is Christmas Eve, so I want to wish everybody a very merry, happy Christmas tomorrow, which is when you guys will probably be listening to this. And remind everybody that even though this has been a super shitty year, it's almost over. And I think that if we all continue to stand by one another and stay connected, even if we can't physically see one another due to the virus, that things will start to get better next year. And I also want to say that I love you guys. I don't know probably the majority of people who listen to this, but sometimes a little bit of love can go a long way. So I hope you guys have a very, very Merry Christmas.